Right, so here we are looking at some of our other vehicles that we've got going around. This is our Churchill Mark IV. We've actually got a Churchill Mark III driving around here. We are very lucky. We have a series of Churchill tanks that are on loan to us from the Churchill Trust. Hopefully, at the end of this, they'll be becoming a gift to the Tank Museum. There's a number of spares that came with them as well, and there you can see Bob driving with that tiller system on the Churchill. The Churchill is actually the fourth type of infantry tank that, dating back to what I was saying earlier, Hugh Ellis in 1933 saying we need infantry tanks. Frontal armour on a Churchill ended up being thicker than that on a Tiger I. You've got really good defence there, and on the turret here we ended up going through a series of guns from the 2-pounder to the 6-pounder to the British 75mm gun, and this again was a tank that started life with an awful lot of teething troubles, but went on to be a very reliable vehicle, and because of its rate of climb was considered a real classic. It could actually get to places other tanks couldn't get to, and was of course converted as well into things like Averies. This is a British Comet. This is another type of tank British made. This is a cruiser. So this is a follow-on from that Crusader. And what you're looking at later in the war, we've got available now the Meteor tank engine, basically the Merlin. Early in the war it was being reserved, the Merlin obviously for aeroplanes to defend Britain and then bombers. But when they derate it, make the Meteor, that then becomes available, meaning that we've got a much more powerful tank engine that can then start going in the Cromwell and the Comet tank. And the Comet, that step frontage, we've got thick armour again. The whole point of that stepped front is to house the Beezer machine gun. This is the last tank they put that on, and with the first Centurions that are coming after the Comet, they decide, no, let's get for a smooth glacé plate instead of that step frontage where you've got the driver's viewport. But more importantly, what it was done is to have a 90-degree angle for the Beezer machine gun, you can see there. 77mm gun. The firepower is basically, they took the cartridge from a 3-inch anti-aircraft gun, and it puts enough force behind an armour-piercing ballistic cap round to go through this tank, the Panther. That gun had actual better firepower and penetration when it's firing armour-piercing ballistic shot. So with a little sabot on there, with tungsten core, that was better at penetration than the 75mm on the Panther. Now this was the Panther that came across from the Musée de Blonde. This is the one that again was being used by the French army after the Second World War. It was captured from the Germans, actually used during the war as well, but Panthers equipped some of the first reformed French tank regiments. And the Panther really is an answer to when the Germans go into Russia and they meet the T-34. The Tiger's already being designed and going into service later that year, 1941. When they meet the T-34, it is genuinely a surprise for most of the German forces. There is a moment where they debate, shall we copy it directly? Being Germans, they have to go one better, and they come up with the Panther, which for many people is considered probably the best medium tank of the war. It's got superb sloped armour, it's got that very powerful 75mm gun you're looking at there, wide tracks, because again it's going to be used on the Eastern Front, the Maybach HL230P engine in the back to give it that power. Initially, at places like the Battle of Kursk, it has a lot of problems, teething troubles, but when they get a lot of these ironed out, this is a very, very effective tank. But we often mention, I've said it already, down to the cruise again, a lot of the time the Germans, amazingly, they are producing equipment as the war progresses. Albert Speer, you know, he's doing this fantastic reorganisation of the Germans' arms industry. He gets production going very, very well, but it's the men they're running out of and skilled crews. Now, we've been very lucky at TANKFEST to be able to put together, you know, whole groups of Sherman tanks, a classic American M4 Sherman of the Second World War, named, by the way, all the British named the American tanks after Civil War generals, so hence we got the Sherman, we got the Lee, the Grant, etc. Now the Sherman comes in an absolute plethora of formats, and so if you're a real rivet counter, look, that one's got a longer body, it must be X, Y and Z. All of this because what they're doing, they cannot make enough Sherman tanks with the one type of engine, and they're building new factories, new companies are taking this on. So we have some with cast hulls, M4A1s with cast hulls, we've got welded hulls, we've got 4 different engine types, which means sometimes the body has to be lengthened, and later, of course, we've got improvements, different suspension systems, or here on our Fury tank, more powerful guns being added. So there is a great range of Sherman vehicles, and we were lucky to get some classics all together driving around our arena. This tank, of course, the tank we loaned to the making of the Brad Pitt war movie Fury tank. We've left all the kit on it. You can see the difference there between the sharper hulled welded tanks and that smoother hulled cast hull tanks of the Shermans. And this one as well, of course, has the 76mm gun on. Most earlier Shermans have the 75mm gun. The longer 76mm is a higher velocity gun. So it's not just that millimetre wider barrel, it's the amount of propellant in the case that forces the round out with more kinetic energy. That's that bigger difference there. Now here's the German Sturmgeschütz. The Sturmgeschütz were originally the idea of Manstein, German general in the mid-1930s. He's arguing infantry should have mobile artillery attacking with them, hence the design of this vehicle. Later in the war, we'll see one in a moment, they end up, instead of just putting that short-barreled howitzer to support the infantry on the tank, they put an anti-tank gun on it. And what you end up having is a very effective, there it is with a 75mm gun, a very effective tank with a low silhouette, or assault gun if you want to call it that way, or tank killer, because you could hide that vehicle easily in a hedge, knock out enemy tanks, and you can build 3 of these for the price of 2 turreted Panther III tanks. So what we're looking at there is a very, very successful German design. For example, in Normandy, we always like talking about the bigger tanks, the Tigers, the King Tigers, etc. Actually, it's the Sturmgeschütz that knocks out more Allied tanks than any other type. So very popular vehicle. Now, here we are with 2 T-34-85s. Early in the war, what we're looking at with the T-34-76, beautifully built tanks just before the war. They're starting to come into service with the Red Army. A lot of them get knocked out, obviously, in those early days of the Barbarossa campaign in the summer of '41. The Russians have to move the factories behind the Ural Mountains, and in the process realise there's a lot of things that are going on a tank that aren't really necessary in combat. So they simplify the design. The tank gets cheaper to build as the war goes on, and in 1944 they come out with this, the T-34-85. Bigger turret, 3-man turret, as opposed to the earlier very cramped 2-man turret, and a bigger gun. Instead of the earlier we saw with the T-34-76, a 76mm gun, that later one has the 85mm gun. And they use the T-34 hull to make assault guns as well. Starting off again with the SU-85, that same gun that goes on the T-34, later in the second model of the T-34. Not worth having if we've got the same gun, so let's put a bigger gun on. So here we go with the SU-100, a 100mm gun. And this particular model, so underneath is basically the chassis of the T-34. This particular one was actually given to the Egyptians and was captured by British paratroopers at Suez in 1956. And it was brought back, and we've actually got records in the museum where it was given to the museum collection and then taken away again for some firing trials that the Army were doing. So there you can see that diesel engine in the back, nice wide tracks, and also a very distinctive noise you'll hear with Russian tanks is a distinctive clack, clack, clack noise as it goes along. That's because of the pins being pushed back in by a wedge as they drive around. They're loose track pins. Another one for the games players here, this is Tortoise. And this was designed with the idea of that word again, assault tank. After D-Day, we thought we may have had to smash our way through things like German defences like the Siegfried Line. So huge, great cast frontage to it, and a 32-pounder gun. Now that gun is actually the next up from the 17-pounder. As an anti-tank gun, they actually fired one of these at a Panther, and the round went all the way through the front of the Panther and exited the rear. So very accurate, very impressive vehicle, and we actually got this running with its Meteor engine in the back. It actually appeared at one of our TANKFESTs driving around the place. We're heading over now to have a look at a vehicle in Belgium and Canada.
The War Heritage Institute is Belgium's national institute for war history, heritage and remembrance. We are proud to have one of the biggest collections of military objects in the world. The participant in this virtual TANKFEST for today is part of the collection of the War Heritage Institute at our location in the Bastogne barracks. This is where we keep our collection of World War II vehicles, and it's also the spot where we have the Vehicle Restoration Center where we restore vehicles. The Sherman Jumbo that is participating in this video has been restored over the period of about 2 years. The restoration was finished in December 2019, just in time for our NUTS event in December. The tank also participated in our big Liberation Column South, which was a remembrance project for the liberation of the Ardennes after the Ardennes offensive. We tried to keep as close as possible to the original tank that broke the encirclement of Bastogne in December 1944. And we also hope to present this vehicle to you in person in the next edition of the live TANKFEST. In the meantime, keep safe, keep healthy, and when you're in Belgium, make sure to visit one of our sites. Thank you.
So here is the Belgian M4A3E2, and they're starting up that Ford V8 gasoline engine, so it's a petrol engine in the back of this model of the Sherman. And this particular one, they've marked it up as Cobra King. We'll talk about that in a moment. But so what is a jumbo Sherman? The Americans, just like the British with the Tortoise, thought we may have to assault some very well defended and prepared positions, and therefore you're going to need tanks that have that much extra protection on, because they're going to be that much more of a target. And what they did with the M4A3E2 on this particular model, the jumbo model, they add more armour protection. So another inch plate's added on, you end up with 4 inches on that front plate, and it's got the newer type turret on it. Now that means this tank becomes slower. It slows it down by about 6 miles an hour because of that extra armour there, and it's overall about 6 tons heavier than the standard Sherman. Same gun as the standard Sherman with a 75mm, it's just those protection levels go up for the use they envisaged it. They make about 254 of them, 250 are sent off to Europe, and they arrive in about September of 44. And as mentioned, this particular model, this one ended up as a memorial tank by the side of the road after the Second World War. Some years later, when it was going to be recovered, when they approached the Americans actually wanted it back. They said, look, can we have this back? And the Belgium War Heritage Institute ended up saying, look, can we keep it? We'll restore it and we'll keep it running. And that's exactly what they've done here. And they've done it up as Cobra King, which is the first tank that got into Bastogne by Patton's relieving force. So it's they've done it quite rightly, you know, because they're based at Bastogne and they've been going through these memorial commemorations over the last year or so. Now this, again, amazingly, Cobra King, the real tank that was the first one into Bastogne, it was kind of lost for a while and then identified it was a range wreck, and that's now back at Fort Benning in America and received Fort Benning in a little while's time. So another one of those variations of the Shermans that's ended up, this one I think is the only running jumbo Sherman now in the world, so quite a piece, and this went through a 2-year restoration out in those workshops that we're seeing there out at Bastogne. It's a big army base that they've now opened up, and it's the site of one of their museums. There's also some of the tanks and some of the vehicles are actually on display in Brussels. That's where you used to go to see the tank collection. You should really go to Bastogne these days to see the collection there. So a bit of a rarity driving along there. Mentioned before, there's that star on the side, not just an American symbol. All the Allies, after D-Day, we've got stars that indicates an Allied vehicle. So here's the M4A3E2 version of the Sherman coming towards us there, coming to the end of this little piece that the Belgians have put together for us.
Located in Ottawa, Canada, the nation's capital, the Canadian War Museum is Canada's national museum of military history. The museum promotes a deeper public understanding of the human experience of war. Since its opening in 2005, the museum has welcomed approximately 500,000 visitors annually. There is a research center, a theater, and a memorial hall with the headstone of Canada's unknown soldier. While our focus is on Canadians in times of war and peace, we have a rich collection of military artifacts, rare vehicles, unique medals, and works of art comprising, in total, more than 3 million objects. The military technology collection is housed in Le Breton Gallery, one of the museum's most popular destinations. A workshop is located next to the gallery for the restoration and maintenance of vehicles. In this open exhibition space, we have 200 large artifacts, including tanks, aircraft, and armored vehicles. This is the finest collection of military vehicles in Canada. We hope you'll enjoy our footage of the Canadian-made Ram Kangaroo that you will see in action in a moment. And we hope that you will someday have a chance to visit us at the Canadian War Museum.
Now you can see here a Ram tank. It's basically, many people think of it almost like a variant of the Sherman that was built in Canada. It's got parts and components that were used on the M3 Grant tank. They don't see combat action, only some are used in Europe. They're mainly used in Europe as training tanks. But what happens is General Simmons, who's in charge of the 2nd Canadian Corps, in Normandy, he actually gets M7 Priests with their 105mm guns. They're being replaced by Sextons with 25-pounders. So he thinks these will be useful vehicles if he plates over where the gun used to go on the M7, and they call them a Kangaroo. They put a section of infantry in them, and they use about 50 of them for Operation Totalize in the attack in Normandy. It's a great idea, seems to work. So they go back to Canada, where a number of Ram tanks at the Montreal Locomotive Works are quickly converted, turrets off, and they're made into a useful armoured personnel carrier. And that's what we're seeing, that the Canadian War Museum restores here in front of us. That's what we're looking at now. 10 infantrymen in the back. You could have a commander, a driver, and sometimes someone operating that little turret that's on the side there with a Browning machine gun in. In the back of it, it's got that R975 radial engine, you know, the aeroplane engine that was used on a lot of the Sherman variants, and gives it so it can keep up with the tanks. It's got the same traction, the same sort of sense of mobility, and they're used by the 79th Armoured Division, and they form specially the 1st Canadian Armoured Personnel Company Regiment back in September of '44. And you can see on the vehicle, so Marion 2, the name on the side given by the troops, there's that recognition star we talked about earlier. And as the vehicle goes around, you'll see the unit insignia, 157, that's this Canadian Armoured Personnel Carrier unit. And you can also see the little triangle with a bull's head in, that's 79th Armoured Division we talked about earlier. Now these vehicles, crewed by Canadians, they are used throughout the rest of the war. Very successful design and adaptation led by the Canadians there. And the idea Kangaroo, you only have to think about it, it's a name, a vehicle with a pouch, or an animal, sorry, with a pouch, marsupial. So from that side of things, Kangaroo is a name stuck for whatever variant they're using going along there. And there you can see that radial engine having started up, fires out a fair old bit of smoke there at the rear, but a fantastic vehicle put together and restored to life by the Canadians.
We hope you enjoyed our restored Ram Kangaroo. To learn more about the Canadian War Museum and how you can support us, please follow us on social media or visit our website.
Well, two other collections there, quite stunning ones. I've not been to the Canadian one. We've met Jim, who's in charge of the Canadian Museum, and his engineers have been over here as well. But that's an amazing restoration, and what a vehicle collection they've got. And of course the Belgians, which is another one of those countries, which is just because It's been basically the gateway for different armies crossing Europe for centuries.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you go to their Waterloo exhibits, if you go to their Second World War, they've got amazing bits and pieces. So again, 2 collections, if you do have the opportunity, definitely worth visiting. And we've put links to their sites and these supporting museums who've given us. If you go to tankfest.org, and again, you'll be able to follow through some of the links that we've been saying earlier, things to the shop, things of how you can support us on Patreon, how you can buy things, how you can join some of our schemes, you know, as become a member of the Tank Museum, etc. So do have a look at tankfest.org.